It's definitely playing. It says it's live.
It's not showing you? Maybe there's just a delay. Weird.
I can even hear it.
It says 3 people are looking at it, but it's just not showing you. But like it's showing you on this camera. Maybe the Wi-Fi is just slow.
I'll just show up for like 3 minutes.
It's like it's not.
Oh, I didn't know you could do that. Thank you. I was watching Brittany Cooper like, oh, there you are. Yay!
Good afternoon, everyone. Even though we still have some folks trickling in getting pizza, we're going to get started with announcements because I know you didn't come here to see me give announcements. So, just a couple of quick announcements. The Moms Association has asked me to let you know that they have a scholarship application for $1,000 for undergrads that is currently open and due today, but may be extended, so you should probably run home after this talk and apply for that scholarship. As well as if you would like your mom to be Mom of the Year, those award applications are currently being accepted, and there's also an Illini Spirit Award for RSOs to help cover the cost of events like this one that you may want sponsorship for. So we all know how hard it is to get sponsorship dollars, so you should definitely check that out. My name is Casey Umlin. I'm an Associate Director here at the Y, and it is my privilege to work with this year's Friday Forum Committee. We are in the Spring 2016 lecture series, Breaking Down Racism, Fighting Racial Injustice in the U.S. I invite you all to look at the series brochures on your seats around the welcome tables and check out the rest of the talks in this series. We only have a few more, and they are all great. We'd like to thank all of our series co-sponsors for financially supporting this program. In particular today, I would like to thank Diversity and Social Justice Education for providing us with free lunch. So that's a special treat for all of us. But of course, all of our sponsors are valuable and make this series possible. Sign language interpreters are available for any speaker in our series as long as we get a couple of days' notice. If you or someone you know needs those services, please inquire at our front desk or give us a call at 337-1500. Friday Forum is rebroadcast on WEF 90.1 Community Radio. And that was my reminder to hit the recording.
Okay. Monday at 6?
Yeah. Mondays at 6, as well as Urbana Public Television, and right now we are live streaming the talks. So when we're able to, we live stream them online. You can follow that on our Facebook in case you ever need to catch a talk from somewhere else. After the presentation, we'll begin a question and answer period using this remote microphone. As those of you who come frequently know, you really need to hold it close to your mouth or else no one will hear you. So please assist us by doing that and by waiting to ask your questions so you can giving the microphone. This helps get your questions on the recording as well as make sure that our speaker can hear you. If you need to leave at any time during the presentation for class or another reason, please feel free to discreetly slip out. If you're a student who's here for class with some other sort of credit, make sure that you sign in at the welcome table. We'll also be circulating that sign-in if you would like to receive emails about these and other programs at the Y. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Pete Haviland-Eduah is Million Hoodies for Justice Communications and National Policy Director and is working towards completing his master's degree at the Ford School of Public Policy at the University of Michigan. Originally from Saratoga Springs, New York, Pete received his bachelor's degree in History and Africana Studies from Union College and has worked on political campaigns in the United States Senate and communications consulting in DC. He is passionate about continuing the march towards true equality and working with the Million Hoodies team to further that mission. Please join me in welcoming Pete.
Good afternoon. Hi, everyone. First of all, I'd just like to thank everybody for coming out today. This is a great crowd, and hopefully I'll be able to bring some new perspective on history, narrative, public policy, and how these things intersect, and how we as a community can reclaim our narrative in this fight for justice. But before I begin, I would like to acknowledge today is a very significant day in the movement for Black lives. Today is the 4th anniversary of the death of Trayvon Martin. His life was taken senselessly because of what his identity is and was, and the narrative behind what that means. So if we could just have a moment of silence to remember Trayvon Martin, may he rest in power. Thank you. So I'd like to thank Casey for that introduction. I really appreciated that. But that's sort of my formal introduction. And I think that my identity as a person really plays into sort of the history and the narrative that I bring to the table when I talk about public policy. And I think it's important for people to know where I'm coming from. So I identify as Black, but I'm also biracial. My mother's white, from upstate New York, and my father's from Ghana in West Africa. I'm a cisgender male, heterosexual, and I'm also an only child. I'm from an upper middle class area, but my family grew up working class. We always had everything that we needed, but sometimes we had to stretch a little bit, and that's okay. My mom worked tirelessly, and she worked so hard to provide for me as a child growing up, and I cannot thank her enough for that. Throughout my life, I've had access to privilege, which includes access to quality education, safety within my household, and a strong, as I define it, network of family and friends. And I think that's important because oftentimes the communities that we're talking about in these discussions do not have that same access to privilege. And so holding that in space is important when we think about these things. As Casey mentioned, I worked in the United States Senate, and I played team and individual sports on the varsity level in college, which informed my mentality of who I am, my sense of self in some of my most formative years. I've been called son, fiance. I'm engaged to the love of my life as of about a month and a half ago. Cousin, nephew, teammate, student, staff member, coach, and most recently activist. And as I mentioned, who I am is important because it shapes my perspective. Now I want to talk a little bit about Million Hoodies. We're a national racial justice network, an exercise network, because we have chapters across the country and we're growing. So if anyone's interested in starting a Hoodies chapter here in Champaign-Urbana, I'd love to talk to you about that and get you connected to the right folks. But we were founded in the spirit of Trayvon Martin. Hoodies initially started as a communications project just to raise awareness around these issues, similar to the way that Black Lives Matter was started. It's my understanding that Wesley was here last week. So when she got together with Alicia and Patrice, it started as a project, but it evolved into something more similar to Hoodies. We gained thousands of likes on Facebook, and I think many of you are probably Facebook fans and get our communications and follow us on Twitter. And we've grown, and we continue to grow. We have chapters in Greensboro, North Carolina, Washington, D.C., Santa Barbara, California, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We have a Central Florida chapter, and then we have our main base in New York City. And our executive director, some of you may know who he is, Dante Berry. He took over Hoodies in 2014, and as a result, found me through Twitter. I was tweeting, getting involved in Black Twitter, and they found me, and they asked me to send my resume. He said, would you like to be our policy communications director? And I was like, I have no idea what that means, but let's do it. So it's been a leap of faith, and so the past 2 years have been certainly a tumultuous time, but it's been interesting. I've grown a lot as a person, and I've gotten to meet a lot of great people that are all working towards this goal of inclusion in our society, making sure that all of our lives are recognized and held in space. So history. The definition of it formally is the study of past events, particularly in human affairs. But what matters is who's telling the story, who's interpreting the story, and the context in which it's told. That's the narrative. Public policy, which is wonky, it's not the sexy topic that everybody likes to talk about, but it's important. Public policy is defined as the principal guide to action taken by administrative, executive branches of the state with regard to class of issue and manner consistent with law and institutional customs. The foundation of public policy is composed of national constitutional laws and regulations. And so, just from that definition, you can already start to think about how history and narrative can play a role in the policies that affect our lives every day. How these things come together are important. When I was an undergraduate student in college in 2009, I took an extended field trip with a civil rights class that I was taking. It was a bunch of sites all over the South, from Charleston to Selma and New Orleans. We were all over the place. But our first stop was in South Carolina, and we visited the Boone Hall Plantation. And I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with that, but what Boone Hall Plantation is, it's a former slave plantation that they've essentially converted into a civil rights museum of sorts. Use the term civil rights loosely. You get there and they have some cotton plants that you can pick at if you choose. In the gift shop, they have pickaninnies, they have figures that stereotypically represent Black people throughout history. Beautiful ground stuff. They also have some old slave cabins that they have maintained and turned into museum exhibits of sort. And as we were wandering the grounds, I walked into one. And I'm looking at a timeline of Black history. And they had some pictures of slaves, and they talked about the Emancipation Proclamation, Abraham Lincoln, and then we fast forward to Reconstruction, and we get into the 20th century, and we talk about Booker T. Washington, W.B. Du Bois, Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier, and then we skip ahead to Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, and fast forward a few more years, and we have Barack Obama, and the music playing in the background, this music coming to a crescendo, but hey, we made it in a slave cabin. And so that struck me. And I think that perception, that narrative of race is something that has rocked people to sleep. That's how we got to where we are. We're ignoring the real history. We're ignoring the violence and the atrocities of slavery. We're ignoring violence committed against civil rights activists. We're ignoring the history of the Black Panthers, which is coming back now. I don't know if anybody saw the recent PBS documentary that came out last week or the week before. Ignored that, glossed it over, because it made people feel uncomfortable, right? And that's the narrative. You look at history books. Just in the past few months, some history textbooks for elementary school kids tried to write slavery in there as, oh, Africans came over for labor. There's a lot more to that. And how we choose to remember that and how that story is told affects our perception. Now, with Million Hoodies, we also dabble in the world of guns, right? It's a salient issue. I mean, just recently, somebody, there's been 2 mass shootings in Michigan and Kansas. And so this is a really complicated issue. And again, the history and the narrative of guns in this country is something that we reconcile with. It's a right guaranteed by the Constitution. But again, we have to consider the context of time. We have to consider the context of who wrote that, right? The Second Amendment was written in 1791. It was written by white, slave-owning men. And it was written in a time where the future of the new country was uncertain. I say new country because this land was always here. It was taken from those that were already living on it. So it's hard to call it new. It was written 72 years before slavery ended, and 129 years before women got the right to vote. But the narrative about guns, it's one that, you're not American if you're not gun owning, right? It's very patriotic. It's red, white, blue, and guns. And we see that play out. Everybody watched the GOP debate last night, or any of the GOP debates. You're not American unless you're packing. And now I want to kind of segue where we have the narrative of race, right? And we have the narrative of guns. And I see that many of you in the audience and your students, sort of how that synthesizes together to affect your lives. So just by a quick show of hands, how many of you know what the 1033 grant program is? One person. Okay, good. So the 1033 grant program, it's run through the Department of Defense. It's a military surplus program, meaning that law enforcement agencies and colleges and universities can apply to the federal government to get military surplus equipment. And this is anything from nuts, bolts, to fixed vehicles, fencing, for large events. If the Illini won a basketball national championship, the 1033 grant program could provide the fencing and the gates for the victory parade, right? That sort of thing. But they also have 45 caliber handguns, M16s, assault rifles, M14 assault rifles, mine-resistant armor-protected vehicles. And you can rationalize, okay, maybe some police departments need this. But colleges and universities across the nation have them. Over 100 do, in fact. And out of those 100, 63 have received assault rifles. You might be asking yourself, why? Why does a college need an assault rifle? Right here in the state of Illinois, Eastern Illinois University has 20 45 caliber handguns, 4 M16 assault rifles. Again, right here in Illinois. Lincoln Land Community College has 2 M14 assault rifles, and Triton College has 2 trucks, 8 M14s, and 6 M16s. Why? I have no idea. So, I'm at the University of Michigan. Our Big Ten brethren, the Ohio State University, they have a mine-resistant armor-protected vehicle. The Huffington Post reached out to the police chief and said, why? And his response was, in case a tornado hits our campus. I'm from the Northeast. I spent time in the Mid-Atlantic, but I don't know that I've ever heard of a tornado ripping through Columbus, Ohio. But that's why they have a 19-ton mine-resistant armor-protected vehicle. Okay. So how does this, what's the justification behind it? Right? Like, all the research, all the reading that I've done, the justification behind it is we need the materials to prevent the next mass shooting on campus. But that goes against the conventional methods of what police departments, what the federal government is recommending. There's a program called Run, Hide, Fight. And it's more or less exactly what you think it is when it's talking about mass shootings. You run away from the shooter, you hide, and your last resort should be to fight. Within that protocol, there's a provision in there that says call police. right? It doesn't say call your local campus safety officer with minors in armed protected vehicles. It's called police, right? And that's an important distinction to make because a lot of times, college and university police departments are accredited on different levels than the local police. What makes this even more interesting, and as it ties into the racial justice context, right, is that a lot of times campus police departments are serving jurisdictions that go beyond campus, right? Take the University of Chicago, for example. The University of Chicago Police Department has jurisdiction with over 65,000 people. 65,000 people. 50,000 of them are not affiliated with the university. So we're taking that good, it's meant to serve students, right? And students have very different needs than community members might have, right? We saw what happened last summer with Sam DeVos at the University of Cincinnati. He was pulled over for a routine traffic stop by a university police officer, and he was shot point-blank range in the face. So it creates this dynamic of, who are they there to serve? And once we dive deeper into the issue, we look at, we're not sure who's the best people to serve that role. At Wayne State University in Detroit, it has a population that is 60% white, 20% black. But I don't know if you're familiar with Wayne State University campus. It's literally in the middle of the city of Detroit. It's a very urban environment, where the surrounding area is 70% black. And they have this type of program. And they've gone on record saying that they practice broken window style of policing in the community. And they use it as sort of the narrative of safety and protection to keep our students safe. So they practice broken windows tactics in the community, which it's almost like pre-crime, right? They'll come after you aggressively for very, very small petty crimes in order to weed out larger crimes. That's sort of the theory behind broken windows policing tactics. But done by a university police department, I'm not really sure how that is going to be effective. And adding to this, I'm not sure how many of you saw University of Texas, what they've done recently. They allowed students to have concealed carry on campus, right? Texas State Legislature said, hey, you guys want to pack in the classroom, go ahead. And so now we have this dynamic, right? Now it's possible for students to carry weapons. And then you have police departments that have these military-grade weapons. So I think you're seeing where I'm going with this. And so the campus carry movement, again, is important to narrative in history. It came out because students and stakeholders is a policy term that talks about outside groups, right? Like the NRA, the stakeholder, for example, and they're involved in this. And stakeholders are saying that students need to arm themselves because they need to protect themselves to survive from the next mass shooting. They're also taking the narrative that our women need to be protected. Right? That's what it is, right? Yeah, exactly.
Thanks.
Our women need to be protected, and the only way that they can do that is with a gun. We need to prevent campus sexual assaults by arming people. We need to prevent campus mass shootings by arming people. So what's this going to do? This creates what I like to call a Cold War on campus. Cold War on the block. So you have students arming themselves. You have your campus safety units, your university police departments that are arming themselves to outgun the next mass shooting. So people are going to be packing because they don't feel safe. And then other people are going to be arming themselves to prevent themselves from what these people are having. I don't know how you guys feel here at the University of Illinois, but if I was walking into class, I don't know how safe I would feel walking, knowing that the person sitting next to me in our lecture might be strapped. It's not conducive to a learning environment. And thinking about what that means in the context of students of color, right? The racial justice piece here. When I was in college, I had the luxury. I was the student body president at my undergrad in college. My side hustle, my work study, I was a campus safety escort. So I had a radio, and if someone needed to be walked home late night from the library, I was the guy they called. And so I would go into the campus safety office, and I went out of my way to say hello, to be polite, to make sure they knew my face, being one of the few black students on campus. I wanted to make sure campus safety knew me, so if anything went down, I would be left alone. Totally for self-serving reasons. And so one day I was out, and we were at a bar crawl. It was one of the things you had to do before you graduated. And so I'm with it was a mixed group of people, white people, black people, Hispanic, it was a very, very mixed group of friends out that night. And we were pre-gaming in the dorm, and we walk out. The campus safety officer comes up to us and said, I need to see ID from you, and you. I was in the front of the group, so I was like, gotcha. What about my ID? Kept it moving. He was like, okay. And so as we kept walking, one of my friends was like, man, I was really messed up. And I turned around and said, what do you mean? He's like, he only asked the black men in the group for their identification. We were a predominantly white school in an urban environment. We were thought not to be students. So it kind of, first of all, just killed the vibe for the night. So we're going out, and I'm like, okay, how do I want to proceed here? So I'm walking back to my dorm, and as I see this campus safety officer let somebody go into a freshman dorm who was clearly underage with a 30 rack of beer, I let that interaction happen, and I confronted him. I was like, hey man, you realize what you did earlier? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, yeah, you realize you asked only the black people in the group for their identification. And he's like, well, you fit the description. That's what he said. You fit the description. I looked at him, and I was at that point in my life, I was 21 years old, and I didn't know what to say. Usually I'm the kind of guy, I always got something to say. But I didn't know what to say to him in this moment. So I looked at him and said, hey, what description is that? He was like, and you were an African American wearing red. I took a step back and I looked down at him, and I looked at the black shirt and khaki shorts I was wearing, and I said, wearing red. The only common denominator was that I was an African American. None of us were wearing red. And he had no idea what to say. And he never, at no point did he say, I'm sorry. He just told me that the description. And then I was supposed to walk away, and that was going to be okay. Fast forward to this past summer. I did an internship as part of a mandatory part of my graduation requirements at the University of Michigan. I worked at the Center for American Progress. Who also at the Center for American Progress was someone you might know, Martise Johnson. Martise Johnson, he was the student at the University of Virginia that was beaten by their alcohol police on campus last year. And so Martise and I, we went out to lunch, and we were talking about what had happened to him. And he walked me through it. He walked me through what it was like to get beaten by the police officers. And I asked him, I was like, well, did they have guns? He's like, yes, but they didn't pull them. I was like, okay. So where am I going with this? Imagine that we were on a campus where they thought that we could have concealed carry. Imagine if they thought I had a gun in that instance, or I could have a gun in that instance, or if they thought Martise had a gun in that instance. What would have happened? I was dealing with unarmed campus safety, but the people that were dealing with Martise, that bloodied him, he still has a scar on his forehead, they had guns. What if they had pulled him? What if they had used him? And I told Martise, I was like, man, you're in a really unique situation, man. You're one of the few hashtags that lives to tell their story. Right? He owns his own narrative. He can tell that story. It's not like some of the other cases we've seen where, oh, they were reaching for my gun. Oh, he was pulling out a pistol. He was attacking me. I felt threatened. Which is also interesting because I worked a lot with law enforcement entities in Michigan. And I was at a community relations event, and I went through a shoot, don't shoot simulator. By police chiefs from another state. And in the simulator, they told me there was a situation that I came across. And they said, if the person is unarmed, you are supposed to holster your weapon. And I said, oh, this is the first time I've heard this. This is not the story that's told when we hear about Darren Wilson. He felt threatened. He never said Mike Brown had a gun. So he felt threatened, so he shot him. Mike Brown's not here to tell his side of the story. He's not here to share his narrative with the rest of us. So back to the how this works on college campuses. All right, is anyone here familiar with Executive Order 13688? This is policy stuff. Yeah, I think so. It's pretty dirty. But last summer, President Obama signed an executive order to demilitarize the police. Maybe you might be more familiar if I frame it that way. So what that does is it bans things like tanks from being out on the street. It bans the optic, right? Whereas the police can be in their normal uniforms and not in their, I don't know what you call it, their reward uniforms, when dealing with the public, right? It's supposed to increase police and community relations. In there, in the fine print, well, I guess before I get to that, it was great. I was happy to see President Obama did that. But if you read it, it doesn't go far enough. You know, when they're referring to tanks, it says you can have tanks with wheels. So you can have armored vehicles out in the streets. But as long as they don't have the tank tread, they're okay. So it doesn't really address the issue. So there's some nuance there. And I know some police departments around the country have started having to surrender some of their material. And this is through the 1033 program. And they're not happy about it. But it doesn't quite go far enough. But in the fine print, there's an acknowledgement that says, we understand colleges and universities have this type of equipment. But we're only going to take action on it if university presidents collectively come to us and say, we want to get this equipment off our campus, which hasn't been done yet. Which brings me to the point, this is a point where we can reclaim our own narrative, right? This is the point where your voice can be heard, right? You have new power as students, right? Many of you don't have to support a family, you don't have to worry about a job. Your number one responsibility is to go to school. But as someone that's also a student, I like to live my life by the phrase, don't let school get in the way of your education. And I think this is a unique opportunity to do that. I think you each in this room have the unique opportunity to organize here on campus, to talk to your friends, to say, this is the story that's being told about us, but this is what we want done on campus. We don't want this type of equipment here. Now, granted, I looked it up. You guys don't have any equipment here at the university. Thankfully. That said, I'm sure many of you have friends at other institutions that might. And this information is public information. It's very easily accessible. There's thousands of sheets in Excel that you can download and go through. And one of the things that we're working at Hoodies is putting this on a map. So cross-referencing what equipment schools have, what the surrounding communities look like. Are they black and brown communities? Are they not? Where do the police have jurisdiction in these different communities? That's something that we're working on. And hopefully, in the next few weeks, we'll be finished with the product and we'll be able to roll it out. But that's something that we're working on, the visual concept of this. But it gives you a point to say, we don't want this on our campus. You know, oftentimes people ask, what can I do, right? And as I mentioned before, organize, make sure your voice are heard. By a show of hands, do we have anybody in this room that is an organizer? We have one in the back. All right. Well, if you guys want to learn how to get involved with organizing on campus, that's the person to talk to back there. And I think it's important to understand the local area that you're in, right? The local community that you serve. Because it's difficult to come in from someplace else and say, this is what your community is. This is the narrative. I, being from someplace else, understand what your narrative is in your community. And I'm going to tell you how to do it. No. This stuff needs to be sourced from the people. And that's what's going to give us collective strength. We can't go around pointing our fingers at some of our politicians and other people from large organizations have said we can't do that. The philosophy of running Hoodies and the correct way to approach is building infrastructure from the ground up. Because there's so many people that have been running voiceless by the systems that we exist in today, the political structures that we exist in today. There are so many people that have been disenfranchised from this process. They're not able to tell their stories. And this is an opportunity. This is a moment within a movement to take that back. So I challenge each one of you to do that, to look within yourself, to look within your own powers that you have. And continue to be vocal, but be truthful. Be truthful to your own story. Be truthful to your own narrative. Recent event at the University of Albany in upstate New York. That's my stomping grounds. Grew up not too far from there, but we saw recently there was a group that they weren't truthful about an event that happened to them. So they filled in some blanks that shouldn't have been filled in, and now they're facing some serious trouble with that. So make sure that you're truthful in whatever you're doing. Stay true to yourself and where you come from. So with that, I'd like to open the floor for questions because I want this to be an interactive discussion. So. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Beth. Thanks for being here. You spoke to the differences in training between on-campus police officers and off-campus. We have a really integrated world here where campus police are off-campus and community police are on-campus. Could you speak more to the differences?
Yeah.
Significant differences? Thanks.
Yeah. So certain jurisdictions, and I'm not sure what it is here, but some officers can carry guns, some officers cannot carry guns, and it depends on how you're accredited, how you're trained. A lot of universities are starting to work with their local police departments so they can get accredited on the same level so that they can go out into the communities and police in the communities and offer those services to people that may not necessarily be students. But other things that protect colleges and universities are things like the Clery Act, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Clery Act, but it's basically a system of reporting, right? So universities can kind of skate around the issue. Looks like we've been cut off here. Do you guys still hear me? All right. Well, anyway, the Clery Act allows.
What were you about to say?
Where I was going with that is that with the Clery Act, it allows universities to kind of skate around the process of reporting. So, if there's an incident of racial bias done by campus police, if there's an instance of police brutality on campus, the schools, there's fine print and it's legalese, so there's ways to skirt around it if you know what you're doing, but they don't necessarily have to report it. And if you're not necessarily reporting it, students aren't going to know, parents aren't going to know, so no one can put pressure on the university to fix it. So I think that's part of the difference. Any questions? I'll come from the podium. Who has to be here because of class?
I have a question.
Sure, yeah.
You mentioned, and I've never heard this before, you mentioned that you grew up privileged.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that you had quality education, safety in the home, and family and friend support. I think that's a terrible, terrible information, not from you, but on our society. And I'd like you to just, how do you come to that knowledge?
It's interesting. Last year, I went to a talk in Detroit on Martin Luther King weekend. And one of the speakers there talked about the Booker T. Washington philosophy of picking yourselves up by your bootstrap. And that's part of the narrative that we hear. So often I hear people say, why can't they get jobs? People of color. Why can't they get an education? They're always looking for handouts. Right? And it plays into this narrative that you can pick yourself up by your bootstraps. And what the speaker said is, yes, that's a narrative, but not everybody has boots. And I thought about that, and I was like, you know what? I've had access to these boots. I have a pretty nice pair of boots. But when I think about some of the people, especially in activist communities, there's a lot of people that we work with that are formerly incarcerated. There's a lot of people that we work with that didn't graduate from high school, didn't go to college, didn't have the opportunity to get a master's degree. And their voice is just as important as mine or anyone else's. They're the people on the front lines facing this type
of oppression each and every day. So I thought about that, and I pride myself on being somewhat self-aware, and just understanding where I come from. You know, I've had friends that made it to college, and they told me about having to share textbooks and share desks at school. Whereas the high school I went to, we had warm diplomacy as an elective that we could take. We had every AP class under the sun, and everyone there had the access to these education materials, and it was great for them. And I mentioned my family because family's a big part, right? You know, I stand on their shoulders. They gave me and instilled in me the confidence and the ability to be who I am and trust in myself. Because being the only African American in my family, and also being from a very, very predominantly white area, you know, for me that presented its own unique challenges. Whereas if I did well in school, that didn't fit with the narrative of what black people were supposed to do to a lot of my white classmates. And so some people internalize that. And I watched how that messed with the psychological experience of formative years for a lot of my peers. But my family always gave me the confidence, and my friends as well, to be who I was and to be comfortable with who I was. And that's a privilege that not a lot of people have. Not a lot of people have parents that are in the home. Not a lot of people have parents that are supportive of lifestyles. You know, I look at a lot of, my transgender siblings that are in the movement. Some of them have been disowned entirely by their family because of who they choose to be, what their gender identity is. And I didn't have to go through that. Those are other obstacles and challenges that they have to go through that I've had the privilege not. Yeah.
We're actually back.
Oh, all right. Back online.
Who knows for how long, but let's go ahead and while it lasts.
All right.
I do want to, first of all, thank you for being here and for being honest. As someone that was, as I heard you speaking when you first started, as privileged. I never like to think of myself as that, but as I heard you talk, I'll be 54 this year. Both of my parents were in the home. When I was born in 1962, they both had jobs here at the university. My dad, campus mail, my mom in the office of admissions. So to make a long story short, I sat in on a class with Dr. Stacy Harwood in urban planning, and as I did one of the assignments, it never dawned on me. I mean, I've heard all my life where students in Champaign-Urbana couldn't even cross University Avenue. I didn't know anything about that. In this building, I had a pen pal to come right out of this building, the YWCA, when I was like maybe 10 years old, or maybe 7 years old, up until the time I was 12. So I know that some people couldn't. I didn't live that. And again, with my assignment that I did, when I grew up, I only lived in new homes built from the ground, first-time homeowners. Never thought about that until 3 years ago when I was sitting in on Dr. Harwood's class. So number one, thanks for being honest and not stopping there. You continue on, and you know that there's others that didn't have the opportunities that you had. So you're helping. And thanks for also giving these students something that they can do. Just find something that you do and just do it. You don't need a crowd. Just do it and be honest. So I thank you for that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I think all of us in here have our own privileges, right? And some of us have deficiencies. I look at my identity in who I am. I can go into certain spaces and I can talk to people and have them listen to me. I can go in certain spaces, and because of who I am, because of what I am, people won't listen to me. And I think that all of us have unique opportunities, and I think this goes back to the point where so often people that want to participate in allyship or they want to be a co-conspirator in the movement, they ask, how can I help? And I think it's utilizing your identity, utilizing your privilege to enter spaces that the movement might not necessarily be able to enter. I talk a lot about this with my friends back home, my family, and I have friends and family that I don't necessarily speak to anymore because I've chosen to be outspoken about race relations. I've offended people because I think that all people are created equal. And when I say Black Lives Matter, I mean that. Black lives do matter. All other lives do matter, but that's what we're talking about right now. We're talking about Black Lives Matter. And I don't even belabor that point because it's been said, and probably more eloquently so by Oprah last week. But it's true. Yes, I saw hands over here going up. Yeah.
Thanks for coming and giving us a great talk. So my question has to do with the root of a lot of these issues that inspired systemic in nature. And one of the things I'm wondering is, how can we instill some sort of sociological, racial understanding between these groups that are so different from one another? I know at the university here, there's police training on diversity, but it's like a 4-hour training program, and that's obviously ineffective. And so, what are some long-term options, and how can we enact that change here?
Sure, that's a loaded question. And I think if I had the answer to that question directly, I would probably be nominated for a Nobel Prize, which I'm not currently. But I think talking to people is the first step, right? And I did some training. I hate the word diversity, right? Because diversity is so implicit that you're just trying to get a room with people that don't look alike, and it doesn't really go beyond that. But having conversations can start to crack the ice a little bit. And I think a good question to ask is, how many people feel appreciated all the time? Right? How many people don't feel appreciated all the time? And you look around the room, and generally 10 times out of 10 in my experience, everyone will raise their hand. And then you can start asking people why. And you can identify those common denominators, those common understandings, right? Like you and I might have something in common that other people here don't. And we can build on that. We can build relationships, and we can build friendships and understanding with that. And I think once we get to know people, that fear of the unknown kind of just withers away. You know, a lot of the things that I hear, a lot of things I see from racist Twitter, talks about them. We have this rhetoric of us and them. Even the comments that surfaced from Hillary Clinton, how did it go? We need to bring them to heal. We need to bring them to heal. That's the problem. We can't create these us versus them narratives because we're all in this together. And I don't think a lot of my colleagues in the movement space will identify as radical. I think in the time and space that we live in today, the notion that all people are created equal truly is a radical idea, right? I don't necessarily subscribe to that being a radical notion, right? I think you and I are equal. I think you and I are equal. I think we're all equal. And I don't think it should be a radical notion that my humanity and your humanity should be acknowledged. And I think coming to just common understandings will help melt the ice. But we got a long way to go.
I have a question.
Sure.
You mentioned that your organization is creating a visual of the different races. Is that going to be on the website?
Oh, yeah. Once it's done, we're going to have a big rollout.
What's the website?
Unitarian-Universalist.org.
Okay.
It might be .net now. We switched .net. Yeah, we switched servers a couple times. It keeps changing on me. Yeah, you just check out moneyhoodies.net. That's what it'll be.
Okay, I'll check it out.
Yeah, and follow us on Facebook and Twitter because we're going to have a big rollout on that as well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I also had a question on geography, and I was just looking for a comparable one, just all over the country, not just, I think you're focused on academic institutions, or are you doing overall?
So what we're doing with Hoodies is we're creating a tool to empower our chapters, which are largely based on college campuses. Right. So that's the idea of sort of geo-targeting our college campuses and universities. But there's a much larger database of every police precinct in the country that has this type of 1033 equipment. DoD put it out. It is thousands of pages in an Excel file, and the Department of Defense and Pentagon, they just kind of rolled it out. Right.
I was looking for a map, comparable interactive map, and it's behind some academic query. I have to put up one of my own research papers before they let me in. So okay. Well, it begs the question of how is it working in academia?
Sure. Academics certainly play a role, right? And finding that role is not necessarily something easy. How do you integrate this concept into a curriculum? How do you teach it? And how do you teach it in a way that's not necessarily paternalistic, but it's a way that's inclusive of everyone that's involved in the process? And I think with the 1033 program, it's something that's not necessarily taught. Policy school, I haven't been in class yet where we've talked about it. So it's truly an interesting thing. I think right now the best resource are local newspapers. And it depends on what your local newspaper has done. But I know in Michigan, MLive, which is a regional newspaper in Southeast Michigan, they took all of the data that had to do with Southeast Michigan, and they organized it into a database so you can just click what police department your neighborhood is serviced by, and you can find out what equipment they've got. So local newspapers are helpful in just doing an internet search. I mean, it's so big and so vast, it's hard to get everything nailed down by one person, but you know, if you know what community you're trying to target, it shouldn't be super difficult.
Sorry we already addressed this. First I want to say thank you so much for this talk.
Yeah, of course.
I thought it really covered a lot of really great areas about privilege and intersectionality and things. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask about some of the initiatives that Youth Justice is working on beyond just what you described in your talk. Like, what are some other, I don't know, some key issues that's being pushed out by Youth Justice?
Sure.
One thing.
Yeah.
Sorry. You can also speak to your stance on respectability politics too. I would like to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay. So I'll speak to some of our initiatives. I think some of the biggest ones that we're working on are internal. Like we're really growing. You know, full disclosure, we were one of the organizations that received money from Tidal from Jay-Z and Beyonce recently. We were one of those groups. And so with that, we're going to fund our Million Weeks Congress. And so we're going to have a large convening in Greensboro this summer. So we're working on planning the logistics of that and securing space and making sure that we can bring people to that so that we can grow our base and energize folks out in communities. So that's dominated a lot of our time. I know me personally, I've been working with some other organizations representing communities, forming policy tables to kind of solidify some of our policy demands. And understanding that they are policy demands and that is just one step, it's just one small slice of the pie in this much larger movement. Because one of the criticisms about policy in this space is that it's not necessarily visionary. You know, I look at it as, you know, I'm an athlete, so I love sports analogies. So, you know, I think policy is we're playing a game of basketball. We're trying to figure out how to get really good at basketball. But I think ultimately, if we're going to succeed and thrive as a people, and I say people, I mean holistically, if we're going to thrive as a people, we need to be playing a different sport. And so there's a visionary piece of that, of figuring out what sport we should be playing and how to play this. To talk a little bit about respectability politics, you know, I think everybody's voice is valid, right? You know, I think that I probably fit the mold of a respectable Negro in a lot of ways. And that's me, because that's who I'm comfortable being. I dress how I'm comfortable, right? But if someone comes in and it's different, I'm cool with that too. And I think that's something we have to deal with that. We have to reconcile with that. I was just watching on Facebook this morning as I was getting ready for this talk. I saw the Amber Rose interview with Tyrese and Rev Run, and Rev Run said, "You need to dress how you like to be addressed," which is problematic, right? I'm going to address people as a person, right? I don't care what you're wearing. I don't care what you look like. That's the way that I was brought up. That's my firm belief. So I don't care if you come in here wearing Wrangler jeans or a dashiki. I'm still going to talk to you like a person because that's who you are. And we really have to reconcile with that, especially within the Black community. I mentioned my identity as a cisgender heterosexual Black male. That group, as I identified, is guilty of harming a lot of people, even within our own community. You hear about trans folks that are getting beaten, that are getting murdered. It's often by straight Black men, and that needs to stop. Black Lives Matter means all Black Lives Matter, not just heterosexual Black males that fit this narrative that's been created. That you need to show up in a suit and tie and have a clean-cut haircut. That's not what this is about. Maybe 50 years ago, that's what was palatable to the nation, but that's not what this is about now. And so it's understanding that. And And so even for me, I understand because of my identity, I need to take a step back and let other people speak at times. You know, when I have something to offer, or when I'm asked to come speak, then I'm happy to do so. But I also understand that sometimes it's best for me to shut up and let somebody else do the talking.
To what extent do you think instances of police brutality are a class issue versus a racial issue? I've heard a lot about people saying, "Oh, well, police brutality, that's just because they're picking on people of a certain, income level, they're just used to people in that area, so they get arrested more." So, like, to what extent is it race versus class?
It's difficult to separate the two things, to be honest with you. If you look at economic statistics, unemployment rates for blacks is twice as high as it is for whites. We talk about statistics. When I worked in the Senate, statistics we used a lot, and it's true that women make 77 cents to the dollar compared to men. Black women make even less. So there's things that have been institutionalized, redlining neighborhoods, giving landlords the power to refuse to rent to certain people. It creates these pockets of socioeconomic inequality. Oftentimes, disproportionately so, it's more black and brown people that are in those areas. And then oftentimes with police brutality, and this is another interesting point, you have police officers that are there to protect and serve the community, but they never belong to that community. I had the opportunity to be in a talk in Washington, D.C., and the talk was with a former police officer from Montgomery County, a former police chief from Montgomery County, which is a suburb just outside of D.C., and a former D.C. police officer that had been a police officer for 30 plus years. And they said, you'll have officers come in from rural parts of Maryland, from southern Pennsylvania, and they want to come into cities like Baltimore, and they want to come into cities like Washington, D.C., and they want to work, tough beats to earn their stripes, but really they have no idea how these communities operate. And so they are imposing a set of values on that community that may not necessarily be of their own. So I think there is a socioeconomic aspect to this, but to separate race and socioeconomic status, I think is really difficult in this instance, but it certainly does play a role. But black and brown people are socioeconomically disadvantaged at a much higher rate.
So I was wondering, if your organization is part of a larger organization, because sometimes when I see it in the news, when you hear about Black Lives Matter and stuff, I don't know, it seems sometimes disorganized. Where you see there's some protesters closing on a bridge or something, or people spray painting. It seems disorganized or sometimes just random. I just wonder, is there a leader to this? Sometimes I don't know how to phrase it.
Yeah, I understand the question. Because we ask and I think a lot of folks that are involved in the movement, the answer they will give you is this, and I subscribe to this as well. Black Lives Matter is a single organization, as Opal, Patrice, and Alicia started. That's their thing, and that is a decentralized organization that has chapters across the country, and they let those chapters operate autonomously. So you'll have Black Lives Matter Chicago, Black Lives Matter DC, Boston, LA, Oakland, all these cities across the country have their own Black Lives Matter chapter, and they dictate what they're going to do based on what the community needs are, right? And to an extent, they're a little bit further ahead than Million Hoodies in terms of the size and scale of the chapter. So that's the model that we're aiming to replicate there. Now, the way that's portrayed in the media is not necessarily the same thing, and that can be problematic. There was recently, you might have seen on Fox News if you watch it, I try to tune into those stations and just to keep abreast of what other folks are saying. But there was a story in there about a Marine veteran that was beaten up by Black Lives Matter activists, and they said that these two black men came up to him and asked him, "Do Black Lives Matter?" And when he didn't respond, they beat him and then they robbed him. And they're saying that they're part of Black Lives Matter. Well, my question to them is, what chapter do they belong to? What events have they done? Black Lives Matter is also used as a slogan. It's also used by the media to kind of contextualize the movement. But to me, Black Lives Matter is an organization. The movement for Black Lives is a collective of all these organizations. At times, people misunderstand that. And people will say Black Lives Matter and say, oh, I'm Black Lives Matter. It's like, are you a part of Black Lives Matter, the organization? The answer is no. You know, they're using that vernacular perhaps incorrectly. So, and other people will say that DeRay is the leader, you know, because he's the most vocally prominent, he's been tapped in that sense. And DeRay is a community organizer, and he's in charge of Campaign Zero, working with the Campaign Zero team, which he helped create. He does his own thing, but because he's so prominent, people want to create this narrative that he's the leader of the movement, right? I feel like too often we're, to use some slang here, we're thirsty to have that single Black male leader so we can say, ah, yes, Dr. King is back. And that's not going to happen. That's not what this is. You know, there are a lot of leaders. There are a lot of important voices here. And for us to sort of funnel that up to one person, it's not fair. And I think that only serves to stifle. So DeRay does the work that he does. You know, I met him on a couple of occasions. He's a good guy. But he's going to continue doing his thing. So I think that's my long answer to your question. I hope that addressed it.
First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for your talk. And in relation to the previous question, talking about class, I was wondering if you could speak to how gender also ties into it, especially gender-based violence, especially women of color.
And that's one of those times. It's not an easy question for me to answer, right? I can't speak authentically to it because I'm not a Black woman. But what I will say is that it is a problem. You know, there's too many times that women are kind of told to sit down and take a seat, and there's no reason for that. You know, when we look at the movement as it exists right now, the people that are driving it are Black women, right? Black Lives Matter is primarily by Black women. BYP 100 in Chicago, led by Black women. You know, at my Hoodies, we have Black women in our leadership. And so, even though I'm here today, that means that. Okay, all right, sorry. You know, there's Black women that are out there. There are Black women being killed and going unrecognized. How many of you know who Ora Rosser is? Ora Rosser was a Black woman that was killed by Ann Arbor police in Michigan in 2014. But people don't know her name. And so I think that these campaigns, like Say Her Name, they are really good ways to raise awareness because Black women have gone unappreciated. Women of color have gone unappreciated, unnoticed. Their voices have been stifled. And that's a major problem because 50, 60 years ago, they were out there on the front lines. They were putting in that work and going unrecognized. They were the unheralded heroes of the civil rights movement long ago. And today, they're at the front lines. And I think that for us to ignore that will be a major error. So we have to acknowledge them. And you know, I think for me, me being here kind of bucks that. But at the same time, you know, when it's time for Black women to speak up and let people know, it's time for me to listen. You know, I can't stand and try to stifle what a Black woman is trying to say, or a brown woman is trying to say, or any woman is trying to say. If they're trying to tell me, you know, as I like to say, what the score of the game is, I need to listen. And I think that's conversations that I need to have with my cisgender, heterosexual male colleagues and friends, saying, look, like, women are just as valuable. And in a lot of businesses, more valuable. And I've had a unique experience in my life where, you know, I was raised by a strong woman, and I've never had a male boss in my life. When I worked in the Senate, I worked for Kirsten Gillibrand, and all of my communications director that I worked for, the ops manager that I worked for, they were all women. And then when I did communications consulting, I was hired by Hillary Rosen, Democratic strategist, strong woman. Everyone that I reported to was a strong woman. And so, for me, it's never been an issue, but I understand that's not the norm, right? The way that our society is being constructed, that's not normal. And it needs to become normal. And so I think that, you know, that's a very long way to answer the question, but I think that we need to really make a conscious and concerted effort to uplift the voices of women, because they've really been in charge of this.
Yes, I find your presentation very informative and appreciate you being here. One thing you said that kind of triggered me, and that is this propensity of the state legislatures to not only permit but almost encourage firearms on college campuses. I just wonder if these people thought this through very well. My experience, the amount of drinking that takes place in boys' dorms, and particularly, I've been invited to a girls' dorm, but men's dorms, and such traditions as we have here, like, I don't know, it's a tradition, but unofficial St. Patrick's Day and all that. Every one of those students, a large number of them carrying guns. Is this going to make campuses any safer? I don't know. And as you overlay the racial thing on top of that, but I think this would be my opinion, is that it makes campuses look much less safe.
Yes. I agree wholeheartedly. And, we'll see how this all rolls out. There was a clause in the way that Texas wrote the law that allowed private institutions to opt out, which those that could did. But still, we have large institutions like the University of Texas that have this. TBD how it's going to work out. But I think that a lot of these state legislatures and a lot of politicians in general, they're looking to get reelected. And in certain places throughout our country that, God, guns, patriotism, that's what's going to get folks elected. And, that's part of the narrative of those areas in the country. If you try to get elected statewide in New York State, where I'm from, and you're saying like everybody's going to get a gun, and guns, you're not going to get elected. But in other places like Texas, perhaps you might get elected, and people do get elected. And so I think there's a lot of pandering to a very conservative audience that's receptive to that message. And then in order to keep their job, they have to do things like this. So I think this is an error in the American political system. We're working on how to figure out how to get past that. Okay.
Early in the speech, you were mentioning that campus police might try to work with city police to up their standards so they would maybe be able to carry these guns. What about when the city police system seems to be flawed in itself with, for instance, in Champaign, we have an officer right now who, since 2010, has gotten 6 formal complaints about use of excessive force, got fired, but then a union arbitrator got his job back, and he's also been settled. There have been 2 official lawsuits settled, or 3 official lawsuits settled. Now this guy's still on the force, and today I believe they decided not to charge him with anything else. I forgot the details of the case, but yeah, with the campus officials wanting to up the training of the campus security officers, what happens if that system, the city system, is flawed itself?
Wow. I didn't know about this, so first of all, thank you for educating me on that. Can I flip that and ask you a question? Are there organizing efforts going on in the city? What are folks doing? How have they responded?
I know that this morning there were protests outside of the Champaign courthouse, Black Lives Matter protests as well as just regular protests about this guy. Why is he on the force? Petition was turned over to the courthouse and was accepted. There were protests this morning. It was a thoughtful situation, but other than that, I'm really not sure.
Well, I think that, are you a student here?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think this is an opportunity for you to continue to organize students, right? Because at some level, the university police, they're still accountable to you, right? They're still accountable to you and your parents, and they're accountable to whoever's paying the bills to keep this university afloat. So if you encourage the university at some level to not work with them, right? Because I'm sure they probably have institutionalized relationships. So if you encourage them to break that, using the stipulation that the university will continue to work with the local police department and get training from them if and when this officer is relieved of his duties, that's something that you can do. And that's sort of the power that you have to reclaim this narrative in this space as a student. Beyond that, it sounds like there's a lot of other things going on in terms of the protest, but also talking to local elected officials, trying to get in touch with the mayor's office. As a policy person, that's sort of the first thing that I do, is I'll look at, okay, what elected officials can I talk to about this? Whose jurisdiction they visited? If it's a local police officer, that means that they work closely with the mayor's office, so they would probably be the most appropriate people to talk to about this. And let them know that your concerns as a student here and as a resident while you live in this area are important, and they're going to listen to you. They should listen to you.
We've run a bit long, so I'm sure that Pete would be happy to do one-on-one questions if anybody's, well, I guess I couldn't say.
I can see
he does have to go back to Chicago. Thank you all for staying, and we invite you to join us again next week as we host Eddie Bacanegra, who's going to be talking about the program Bridging the Divide, which is a police and youth dialogue program, which may actually answer some of the other questions.
Oh, by the way,